I'm Helene Mantel, and I'm the grants coordinator with the Ossining Union Free School District here in Ossining, New York. Welcome to the GPLH webinar Program Evaluation 101. It's great to welcome you and our speaker this afternoon. But before I do that, I just want to mention we have a few upcoming programs that are free for members. Our next webinar will tentatively be on June 17th with Susan Matheson on the New York State Consolidated Funding Application, CFA. Members will receive an email notification with the date and time. The next connections call is scheduled for April 16th at 8:30 in the morning. If you don't know, the connection calls are informal meetings set in an open forum where you can ask questions, get advice from your peers, vent frustrations, support one another, and share what trends we are seeing. If you're not a member and you paid for this event, we'll happily apply that fee to your annual membership. You can go to our website to become a member and use coupon code SAVE30. That's SAVE 30. And I think the website's going to be dropped in the chat. We'll distribute an email with the recording and slides to the registered participants. And these materials, of course, are always available on the GPLH member-only section of the website. A survey will be sent after the program so we can get feedback to better help us meet your interests and needs. A couple of house rules. Please mute yourself, but not me, until the end. Please refrain from using any AI scribes or note-taking softwares. We'll monitor the chat for questions, so feel free to add them throughout the program. There may also be time for Q&A at the end, so let's get started. I'm excited to introduce today's speaker. Jeff Winthal is the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the United Way of Westchester and Putnam. Aside from wearing his grant writer's hat and being a GPLH member, he also spent 10 years as a program evaluator, measuring local, state, and federal grants. His evaluation experience included measuring National Science Foundation pre-K to 12 education grants to countrywide anti-poverty initiatives. And prior to joining the United Way, he taught program evaluation and research methods courses at Binghamton University's Social Work Department for their graduate students. So Jeff, take it away.
All right, thanks, Elaine. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Okay. we have a long. I would say this is going to be a rigorous crash course. I would say for a program evaluation 101 webinar. So we're in for a ride. Okay, so let me get started by sharing my screen and let's go from there. There it is. Okay, does everyone I guess see the screen? You see the PowerPoint? Awesome. Okay, so let's get started. So when we think about program evaluation, we always think about like measurement or assessment of a program, but we first need to actually define what a program is. We have to operationalize that word, program. And what it is that it's essentially an intentional set of interrelated activities. And it could be services, it could be supports to whatever target population that you're focusing on, all of which that lead to some kind of expected outcome. And then, again, this is an intentional process. And this word program could be used with, interchangeably with intervention or treatment, innovation, or the words project. They all can mean the same thing depending on the context. And a program essentially, for what its purpose is to address a need. So when someone does a community needs assessment or any kind of needs assessment, that's the need right there we're trying to address. And that's what the program is used for. All the activities that are in this program are to complement each other. They're not separate. They're not separate entities. You're not doing like playing baseball. Then we're going to do some academic, enrichment. They have to be associated with one another. They have to be related. And then in order to do all this, we need to understand what the framework of a program is. So we have goals, which are broad and long term. We have objectives for a program, which are measurable. We have activities, but essentially, what's being done. And part of the activities that you also have to articulate, dosage, which is the intensity or how much the activities are, the breadth of it, which is the range of the different activities, and the duration, the length of it, like how long is it, like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, is it 6 months? So that all has to be articulated. And then you have to also articulate, how are those activities being delivered? Do you have like some kind of implementation plan, like a manual, like a how-to guide for all the staff to use? It's all about communication in this case. You also have a work plan. And think of work plan as like a roadmap, which has your objectives, the staff involved, the activities. You have a timeline with your checkpoints in it, and you have success indicators. How do you know if it's working or not? In terms of like the activities, in terms of fidelity. And then you have your outcomes. They could be short term, could be intermediate or interim, or they could be long term. And when we say outcomes for long term, that's usually like your impact. What's your program impact? And then you have your budget and budget narrative, the cost to deliver the program and the detailed explanation of each line item in your budget. And then last but not least, you have your program evaluation. We want to see if your program's working or not. And then this would be one example, pardon me. So like a health example, I want to improve my health. Very broad. And well, we have an objective now. I guess I could exercise daily for at least 30 minutes. We can measure that to some extent. And we have some kind of activities for health activities. I can go see my doctor, get a checkup. I could take yoga. I could do some cycling or bike riding, or I could do some swimming. So these are some different activities for health, for exercising. And how are we going to deliver these? Well, I could attend a yoga class for 60 minutes per class for twice a week with a trained instructor. I could use a stationary bike for 45 minutes at a gym spin class or maybe at home. Or I could take swimming lessons at a gym swimming pool. And we can set a work plan. So you have an exercise schedule to follow. You can have your outcomes of increased energy after when it's all said and done. You can track your weight loss if you have weight loss and any increased motivation, release that dopamine hit and then you get better motivation along the way. And then you have your budget. How much is it going to cost to see my doctor? Health insurance. If you don't have health insurance, there's always a cost, or you have to pay a copay. How much does it cost for yoga, like yoga lessons, or a gym membership, or swimming lessons? And then you write your narrative, for that budget, like a detailed cost benefit of doing these different activities over a span of time. And then your program evaluation, which is your data collection. Maybe using a weight scale, baseline and over time. Your pants waist size, if you're losing weight, you assume that your waist size is going to drop down to a different size. Self-reported motivation, you may feel better across time, or you can do blood tests, at your doctor's office. Your metabolic or lipid panels, kidney function, liver function. You can look at cholesterol and your glucose, your A1C tests. You can look at your sugar levels, and then you could look at when you have all that done, you could look at your data and then analyze it and then report on it. So this is one example of like a work plan, very linear. You have your deliverable activity on the left side, all the way to timeline on the right side. This is just a template, you use. You have your indicator of success, which is your output, and then you have how your indicator will be measured. So this is just some examples. So like, let's say for the first one, you visit your doctor to do some blood work, and your output is to know that you actually have your results. And then how do you measure that? Well, you got it done, fidelity check. And then you have your timeline. You can do it twice. One in April, baseline, one in October, your post test. And then so on. And then the different ones, for example, like yoga, starting spin classes or swimming. And here's another example. Let's say we have Elmo's after school program. Anyone who's familiar with Sesame Street, we have Elmo here. You can have objectives. Again, they are measurable. So we want to increase academic achievement for at-risk students. We want to reduce disciplinary infractions for the same students as well. And let's say our target population. We have 300 students that we want to help in grades 1 to 5, so elementary levels here. And let's say for one activity, Provide 240 hours of academic enrichment in math and English language arts, or I guess reading. This is, I guess, across the school year. And then a second activity, provide 240 hours of positive development opportunities. It could be art classes, fitness, yoga instruction, games, a STEM club, anything that helps youth development for students. And then you can have two expected outcomes. Again, this is your assumption here. 70% of those students are going to show improved grades in math and ELA, or the same students are going to show fewer disciplinary infractions. So again, we're making this assumption here. And as you're doing this, you can even go further. You can start creating hypotheses. So hypotheses mean like an educated guess. These are testable. You can test this. So like first hypothesis, students attending for 90 or more hours will indicate higher academic achievement than students attending fewer hours. I mean, it's logical sense, but again, respect to dosage. You have a second hypothesis, students attending more positive youth development activities should indicate or will indicate fewer disciplinary incidents than students who are not doing so. The range of activities. So students who are attending more positive youth development activities like art, yoga, STEM club versus students who are only attending like one activity. And then students who are attending consistently, so you have some continuity here throughout the school year, will have better school outcomes than students who are attending sporadically. So there's continuity over time, that duration. And why this is important? Well, you're focusing on the target population and impact. For 90, and research shows that 90 plus hours of out of school time programming starts to finally lead to positive academic outcomes. And that's by the Wallace Foundation in 2017. And in 2025, the American Institute of Research showed that 120 plus hours of out of school time programming can actually lead to fewer disciplinary incidents. And the whole purpose of doing this is to have an effective program with a positive return investment. So let's actually apply this logic in a real world setting. And I'm pretty sure we've got this happen to at least one of us. So a sick patient visits a physician and then they are diagnosed with strep throat. And then that's a bacterial infection. So what would be an evidence-based course of action? Well, we have research shows that responsible antibiotic use leads to good outcomes. So dosage, doctor says you have to take 500 milligrams of amoxicillin twice per day. Okay, and then the breadth of it, range of activities to help with your symptoms. Gargling with warm salt water. Drink a lot of water from hydration. Maybe some honey and lemon for a sore throat, and then pain relievers. Maybe you want to take some Motrin and Tylenol. And then you have to do this for your antibiotics, 10 days for a total of 20 doses. And the goal part of this is that you want to avoid antibiotic resistance. If you deviate from this, let's say you decided, oh, you know what, I want to take one dose per day for a total of 10. You may not get an effective response. You may not get an effective outcome of this. So that's why we follow this order, doing 500 milligrams twice per day in terms of dosage. And the same with a program, with social programs, like an academic program, education program. The more hours a student attends after school or outside of school, the more likely they're going to have a better outcome. And if you don't do so, there are 3 reasons why programs fail. First is that you spread your resources too thinly. So, I mean, if you take like a tablespoon of peanut butter is spread across a loaf of bread, that makes absolutely no sense. We do that for a slice of bread, but across a loaf of bread, you're not going to get a good effect on that. If you're not reaching your target audience, you're supporting affluent students rather than underserved students. This happens sometimes. Like you think like a STEM club at a school, you may see like in that STEM club, and these are like some of your best students in the school. And essentially that STEM club's really supposed to focus on students who really need those opportunities. But then yet those students have like, straight A's or, they're going to Yale in high school. And then if your program is too complex that you can't even measure it, you're making significant modifications or deviations from what was originally proposed, what was awarded from your funder. You can't even track fidelity, and it's just way too many moving parts. So it's so confusing. And then there's a difference between research and evaluation. This gets actually asked quite often. Research is time consuming and it's very costly. And what you do in the research is you're testing theories, you're posing and using research questions, you're trying to answer those questions, and you have an extensive literature review. And your job here is that you're producing new generalizable knowledge that other people can use or replicate. For a program evaluation, it's different. It's pragmatic, it's practical, it's somewhat realistic. And what you're trying to do is that you're measuring program effectiveness to make good decisions, to inform decision making. You judge your intervention's value or return on investment. You're also including doing research, but to a certain extent, using the scientific method. So this is a scientific process. But then yet you are limited by time and resource doing a program evaluation because you may not have the resources, the training, the money involved, or you may not actually have the staff to do this. So one quick example of a research and evaluator, researchers think they could do evaluation, but it may not be the case because it's very pragmatic and very timely. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts here. So what is program evaluation? And by definition, it is the systematic collection and analysis of data for measuring the design, implementation, and effectiveness of a program. And we do this by actually creating an evaluation plan. So in the program, we have a work plan. So in an evaluation, we have an evaluation plan. You have a design of framework that you follow, and it's most cases theory-based. You hear the terms theory change sometimes, or program theory, or you can use whatever theory that you like that fits the model. And then you have a logic model to help explain what this program looks like, in a one-page map per se. And then what this theory change does, what the theory does, is that you're making assumptions here on how that program is going to work and what is it going to do for your intended target population. And then part of this process that you're having data collection methods, and then you're doing sampling as well. You have a data analysis reporting. There's like statistical analysis, or for quantitative data. If you have qualitative data like open-ended, text data, then that's a whole different process, which we'll talk about soon. And then you're getting reporting, annual reporting or quarterly reporting, depends on your funder and what the reporting schematic is like. And then you have a work plan, which we'll show later for an evaluation. And then you have your budget with the narrative. It's very similar to, again, what a grant writer does for when they apply for a grant. And the evaluation budget typically is 6 to 8% of the total program budget, unless the funder sets a specific value like 5% or 10% or up to a certain monetary value, whatever that may be. Some do that. Program evaluation also views programs holistically. It's client-centered by building relationships. I mean, this may sound familiar for anyone who does consulting work. Develops organizational staff knowledge and capacity. So think about evaluation capacity building for a not-for-profit. It is never used as a gotcha mechanism. Like there's never if someone does something wrong in a program or the program is not working as intended, it's not meant to be a penalize anyone for doing a bad job or making mistakes. The whole point is that you're growing with this, is to make course corrections along the way. And it's a journey of discovering facts and the truth. And it's also measuring a program and not the individual's performance. And I want to point this out, the importance of this, because back in the day when I was doing program evaluations, one example is I was evaluating a professional development program for teachers. And I had to visit a school to do a class observation for a teacher or a group of teachers who was using new instructional methods or instructional practices and content knowledge that they were learning from this program. So I went into the class, told the teacher about it, and they were aware of this. And I would say, okay, I'm going to use this class observation tool and sit in the back of the class and observe your class. As I'm going to the tool, I'm watching whether or not the teacher's actually using those methods that they learned from that professional development training. Did the teacher in fact adopt those methods or those practices in their training, or did they actually take it and modify and use it for a different purpose? When everything was done, I thanked the teacher and I left. As I was leaving, went to the main office to sign out. The principal stops me and says, "Hey, I saw that you observed one of my teachers. Could I get a copy of your class observation? Because next week I have to do a performance evaluation on my teacher." Yes, short answer is no. You do not share that kind of information. Any data that you collect is confidential. So you have to adhere to ethical guidelines and practices. So like in research, ethics is extremely important. Anytime you do any kind of data collection or collect anything from any individual, ethics is important. So the theory change, what is this exactly? It's a description, a picture of how and why a desired change is to occur. It explains how a certain intervention is supposed to work and how it can lead into intended outcomes. And we use a logic model to show this. You can start backwards sometimes by identifying the outcomes first, and then going back to your resources that's going to get you there. And you are describing your preconditions that are needed to meet the outcomes that you have. So here's one example, and we often use in if-then statements. So like if I participate in a exercise plan for 8 months, then I'll lose weight and improve my health. Again, assumption. If students attend Elmo's after school program for 90 plus hours, then they should have some improvement in their grades, based on research, this should happen. But then again, assumption. And on the bottom, we have this linear process here, very, generic kind of diagram, the PAT diagram. Students attend after school program, improve their grades. But then we need to be really pragmatic about this as well. If you want to do like health exercising, you want to do a spinning class. I think that's like from the office, the show. You want to do like a spinning class, like cycling, or you want to take yoga, or you want to learn how to swim. Doing all of this, if you assume that this is going to make you like into Michael Phelps, the gold medalist swimmer, the Olympic swimmer, chances are that that's not going to happen. It takes many years of like practice and training. All the doses, you have to be really pragmatic about how you explain your theory of change. So here's another third example, needs assessment, why is this program needed or an intervention needed? Maybe like the statement of need, as they say. You have your participants, who is it for, and how you're going to describe your participants, like the demographics, like certain characteristics about them. And if you have the intervention ready to go, explain it, detail that intervention and how is it going to work? What's it tend to do? And then your outcomes, what are the outcomes? So what about this program that you expect to happen? And then we have logic models to explain this. It's a linear trajectory to explain how a program works. And more importantly, it's a good communication tool, especially you have a lot of people in the room who are giving some really good ideas, but then you have some competing ideas as well. You can help find common ground with this. And you have the collective efforts of different goals and objectives of multiple organizations. You try to find that commonality, between different stakeholders. So here's one example, a very generic example, going back to the health plan. You have the yoga studio with the inputs and resources. That's everything being put into, I want to do health exercising. You want to go to the gym. You want to do swimming lessons with the instructor. And then you have your activities and your outputs. And then your outputs and outcomes are not the same. They're different. The outputs is your direct result of what you see. Number of people who are, I guess myself in this case, or whoever, who are exercising, you can see that. But then the outcomes is like, the so what? What did you take away from this? Just because you went to the gym or you did some swimming, what happened? What was the takeaway? So yeah, increased energy, increased motivation to continue, have better knowledge about how to exercise and, about my health. And the impact here in this case is, yeah, improved cholesterol and glucose levels. If I have like really bad LDL cholesterol, doctor says, hey, you do want to take a statin or do you want to go exercise? Which one do you want to do? Let's start with exercise, a more conservative method. And then you have a healthy body mass index in terms of, being, within weight or overweight or obese. And you have sustained weight loss if you're trying to lose weight. This is a little more now detailed. Now we're looking at an after school program or education program, particularly like Elmo's after school program here. You have your inputs and resources, the staff, the school district faculty, the parents involved, your subcontractors who are providing extra services. You have nonprofit partners, advisory council, down to your activities that's being done, to the output, 240 students or 300 students, whatever number of students are receiving or have received high quality after school or out of school time programming. Then you have your outcomes and then your impact, what to expect. And when we say impact, the assumption here could be 3 years, it may take 4 years. Sometimes these programs can be a 5-year program. And you may not see impact until like 3 years later on, because it takes time to get that kind of dosage and get that effect. You may be lucky to see it in 1 year, but it's highly unlikely because sometimes a program could take what, a year and a half to a year, like 12 months, 18 months to really go on full operation. No hiccups whatsoever. And then again, this is a linear trajectory. And we want to make the assumption, this is showing how effective your program could be based on this assumption. And those inputs and resources, we're assuming that your staff are trained, you have the space ready to go, the school district faculty are going to be supportive. Again, making these assumptions. Because when we go to a much more detailed logic model, on the left side, we have what we call the efficiency side, which doesn't show the effectiveness part. The efficiency side shows you how you can make those inputs and resources to become effective in their roles, which can hopefully give you an effective outcome. The content in this case doesn't matter. It's the logic that really matters here. Following this logic. So if you have staff who are going to provide free like services in an after school program or at a food pantry or whichever service it may be, you want to make sure that they're trained up. You have the right training, you have the right qualifications, communication said you have plans ready to go. That efficiency side does just that. You're explaining, you're articulating that, how that looks. In a typical logic model, we don't do this, but if you want to be really detailed, especially if you have a funder who wants to know what your program looks like, this could do it. And then we have an evaluation design. And the point of doing this is that we're aligning with our program's goals and objectives. And yes, we are incorporating theory here because we want to test this. We have an experimental design. We think about a random assignment, and we want to reduce bias here because that can, put error in your model. And error is a bad thing. You don't want error. There's always error, but you try to reduce that. And for one example, we could do randomized control trials. We call them RCT. And these are really the gold standard for determining any kind of causal relationship, X leading to Y, which we'll talk about soon. Think of like treatment groups, which your control group. And your treatment group is like the students who are receiving the intervention after school versus a control group who is not receiving that intervention. So thinking like in that kind of way. And then we have a quasi-experimental method. It's a non-randomized assignment. You do have increased bias here, but it's more practical. It's timely, and it's more cost-effective for a program evaluator to use. An experimental method or experimental design, it can be time-consuming, and in often cases, it's not practical. But I want you to show you the difference between the two here. And moving forward from this part of the presentation, it's going to get a little more technical from here. We have a quasi-experimental design. So to help increase rigor or robustness or the strength of it, we can do the following. We can use match comparison groups. You can have your treatment group, let's say an after-school program, you have your demographics, you can match them to maybe like at a different school that doesn't have the intervention with similar demographics, like socioeconomic status or their race, or the zip code, because that can tell you a lot based on where they live, or their academic achievement, like their test scores, their proficiency scores from New York State, for example, in ELA and math or in science. You could do pre-test and post-testing. Pre-test and post-testing, it's like baseline and, and again, interim tests over time. So your program participants, they get a pre-test, you give the intervention, and over time, then you give your post-tests. And you want to measure for those differences, before and after. You could do the same thing for your comparison group, or you don't have to, depending how you create your model. So like if you use like a comparison group from like a school with similar students based on their demographics who are not in an after-school program, you don't have to give them anything. You could just use their demographics and their test scores later on when you get access to them to make that comparison. Now, as we're all doing this, we also have to understand what variables are, because this is an important part of your design. You have what we call independent variables, or IV, or known as X. These are variables that you can manipulate or change, such as the programs being offered, the activities being offered to students, for example, or the staffing involved when they provide academic enrichment in their qualifications, or the number of student hours in the program, the amount of doses they have. And we call that a predictive variable because that can help you predict your model. And then you have your dependent variable, which is DV or Y. It's your measured effect. We don't know this until we actually do the analysis. It could be a student's test scores, it could be academic achievement for a student. It could be how a student feels in terms of engagement in the classroom. It could be the number of disciplinary infractions for a student. This is what we're measuring for. So this is a really basic, conceptual model of this. So after school enrichment leading to, causal relationship per se, to improve student grades. If you exercise, you should assume weight loss. Or if you believe in Santa Claus, positive family traditions. If you have any children or grandkids, there you go. If everyone believes in Santa, that could be used for positive family traditions. In here, this is what we call a multiple linear regression analysis per se, but we'll get into that. You have multiple independent variables like academic enrichment, positive youth development activities, parent educational attainment, their level of education, all leading to improved student grades. And this can even broken down even more, like there's different levels, like in academic enrichment, it could be math enrichment, reading enrichment, STEM enrichment. For positive development, you can break that to different levels, like STEM club, arts activities, or music class, and parent educational attainment that gets broken down to different levels. That could be a bachelor's degree, never graduate high school, I guess level of education, or up to a graduate level of education. So things like that. You also have mediating variables, which can indirectly influence that independent and dependent variable relationship. And what this does is it helps explain the process between those two variables. So one example, parenting style. You can have a group of students who attended after school for 240 hours. And within that group, some students are doing really well in their grades, and yet you have a handful of students who are not doing well, even though you expect them to be doing well based on what research is showing, doing all the activities, but you can't explain why they're not doing well. Well, let's say you give a parent survey to see what the parents are doing at home, and you find out that you have a group of parents who are just not involved. They're uninvolved. They're just not engaged. Maybe they're just too busy. They're working like 3 part-time jobs. They have no time. They want to do the best they can, but they can't. And then you have a group of parents who are very involved. They stay on top of their kids. They want to make sure they have high demand, high expectations, but a nurturing kind of way. You want to make sure the students are doing well, the kids are doing well. And you realize that, there's a difference here. Parenting styles actually help explain that. So parents who are more involved with students as a mediating variable can help explain why students are doing better in school versus parents who are not as involved, and those students who are getting all that treatment, all those hours, are just not up to par. So that's where we use a mediating variable to help explain that kind of relationship. Then you have a moderating variable, and that modifies the strength or direction of your independent variable or dependent variable relationship. Like think of like a light dimmer switch, or like if student motivation is high, expect a stronger effect. Complete opposite as well. And you have confounding variables like students' home environment, dietary habits. These are variables that you don't know they exist, but they're there. Some example, like a pathway of looking at the mediating and moderating relationships. And again, you'll get the slides later, so you can always refer back if you have any questions. And then now the big one, let's talk about data, because there happens to be like a misconception how these two words are being used, data and information, interchangeably. So data is raw numbers, text, audio, images. It's all raw. Not analyzed, no context given, requires data analysis, and that gives you descriptive stats, inferential stats, and for coding for those qualitative statistics. When I say qualitative data analysis, it's like text data. And then information, it's when it's been analyzed, it's been given context and interpretation. So here's one diagram that shows that difference. So we have data, again, it's raw. Don't know, there's no context. You're collecting that data. You have information. Now it's been analyzed. So after you analyze your data, you give it then some kind of interpretation. It becomes then knowledge. And then once you reflect on that knowledge, it becomes wisdom in this case. You use that to make informed decisions when you get to that wisdom part. Do we want to sustain this program, or do we want to sustain a few activities within the program? Or do we have enough funding to create a new program because of X, Y, and Z? It all depends. So this is one example. Is this data or information? And based on this, this is a bunch of jumbled numbers. We have scale scores, not proficiency example. For example, this is data. There's no context here. This has been analyzed. So again, data. But when you see something like this, is this data information? Something like this now in this case, we have number of kids tested for ELA and math, the proficiency rate, their ranking in New York State, for example. Someone may call hey, this is data, but no, really, this is actually information. Someone already had a huge data set, they analyze it, and they spit it out into what we call information, which you see right here in these tables. This is information. We have this one right here, not to get onto the New York State Education Department, they have what we call their New York State data website or data site. And I hate to break it to you, but everything here is information, even though they call it data, because it's already been analyzed. And if you can actually download a raw data set that has been analyzed, then yeah, then that's data. But if everything's like this, for example, on their website, this is all information. This is not data. Someone's actually analyzed all the number of different English language learners in Westchester County from K to 12 and pinpointed that there's 10% of them throughout the entire county. This is information for you, not data. And another example here for Sesame Street characters, a number of push-ups for Cookie Monster or Elmo, or number of miles ran in 20 minutes, or your glucose level, based on your A1C levels. And then what's your favorite activity? Again, looking at these numbers, this is data, not information. This hasn't been analyzed yet. I mean, one can really quickly surmise that, for Cookie Monster, can do a push-up in 60 seconds, has a really high A1C low, is probably diabetic at this point. Eat so many cookies. Yeah, again, data. Hasn't been analyzed yet, though. And U.S. Census Bureau, when you see any of those stats when you search for it, yep, information again. It's not data, it's information. If you have a raw data set, that's data. But if you see things like this, information. And here we go now, types of different data. We have continuous data, which is numerical. So think of like student test scores on the 0 to 100 scale. You have temperature, weight. And when we use numerical or continuous data like this, we use a linear regression, which we'll talk about soon. Your dependent variable, which we already mentioned, has to be continuous. We have categorical data. So think of like text, numerical data. You have nominal, which are like names, colors, marital status, race. You're often binary, like yes, no, true, false. They could be ordinal, so like rank order, think of like a Likert type scale, like 1 to 5, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Or like in the military, you have different ranks in the military. One is like a captain, 2 is like a lieutenant, and so on. You have logistic regression is a kind of analysis we use for categorical data. Your dependent variable must be binary and categorical. Binary being like yes, no, or true, false, or like 1, 2. And we use coding for qualitative data analysis when we have to make categories or make patterns. And you have also discrete data, which is numerical. Think of like whole numbers of countable values, so number of students in a classroom, number of ice cream flavors. If it's Baskin Robbins, like 32 flavors, that's way too many. Maybe that's continuous at that point, but think of like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. The main flavors. Number of people in this webinar, it's countable. Again, discrete. And we use what we call a chi-square test for this. And what you're doing is that you're checking the relationship between two categorical variables. And it's really good for data frequencies, like in this case. Again, whole numbers, quantum values. Levels of measurement in this case, just want to give you there's a scale with your data. So like nominal, thinking like names, like eye color, for example. Ordinal, like a strongly agreed to strongly disagreed. Level of satisfaction, 1 to 5 scale, or 1 to 3, 1 to 7, whichever scale you want to use. You have interval, which is like temperature. There are equal interval between variables, so they're equal in terms of the values. And then you have ratio. It could be height, be weight. This means that you have a true zero. This goes into statistics, which I'm not getting into today. I don't have time for that, but just want to point these out at least. And when you do a descriptive data analysis, we have central tendency. Think of like mean scores as an average, your median, which is your midpoint. So like if you take 5 scores, it's your third score, it's going to be your midpoint. Or like your median household income, you have like a huge range. You take your midpoint, the very middle household income, and that's your median. You have your mode, which is your most frequent score that you notice or you see when you do your data analysis. You have your standard deviation, which is the difference of scores from the mean. This helps you like how far away are scores from one another. And then you have what we call frequency distributions. And we usually do this to map how your scores look on your data. We use histograms, we use bar charts, we use pie charts. They could be a parametric, which think of like a bell curve that you probably seen before, or non-parametric, which could be skewed, which is left tail to right tail. Skewed means that if you give a survey to a bunch like to 100 students and it's a 1 to 5 scale and all of them said 5 on that scale across all the different items, yeah, it's skewed. There's no variability on that. And kurtosis is where all the scores are centered. So instead of 1 to 5, they all score a 3, right in the center. So you have a non-parametric data, that's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And then you want to check for outliers as well. To someone like if you Westchester County, for example, median household income. If you may have like a billionaire who lives in Westchester County, their income can really skew people who live in Westchester County. So that's one example. So things like skewness. Skewness is not a good thing. It's a bad thing for your data. It increases error. You have different kind of statistical models, things like inferential models. You have regression analysis, and what you're doing here is that you're predicting your relationship between your independent variable and dependent variable. And again, you're not inferring or proving causation here. You're not doing it. You're just looking for understanding the relationship between your two variables here. And a major goal of this is you're measuring the amount of error that you have. And part of the analysis, when you do a statistical analysis, that's what it does. It does that. And we have to use assumptions to do this. So part of your descriptive analysis, is your data in a linear format or is it scattered all over the place? Was the data collected independently? Like, did you give it to like one student at a time, unique students, unique, one student had like, in a class with 30 students, all 30 students, do a survey versus one student doing all the surveys. If we have to do this because we have to make sure that when we meet these assumptions, it gives us an idea on what statistical analysis we should be using. So like for a simple linear regression, for example, we have one independent variable, one dependent variable. We need continuous data for this. And it has to be in a linear format. Again, parametric, not skewed or it's centered. Well, multiple linear regression, think of like multiple independent variables, again, with that one dependent variable. You have what we call logistic regression, used for binary categorical variables, yes and no. If you give a survey and you have get a lot of yes and no answers in there, yeah, logistic regression is probably going to be the one you want to use for that. There's also ordinal and multinomial logistic regression. That's more advanced when you have multiple categories, like 3 or more. We have multi-level modeling. This is where we have used nested data, think of like a school, where you have individual student or students. That's be your first level. Then you have a classroom, which is level 2, and level 3 being the whole school itself. That's when you want to make comparisons between different schools, different students. And this is very advanced. This is often not used by a program evaluator, but maybe if they do a lot of work with education and have large data sets, this will be a really powerful tool to use. You also have chi-square, which we talked about, and we have analysis of variance, also known as ANOVA, where you use 3 independent variables where you want to compare group means together. So thinking like you look at different test scores, you want to compare the means between those test scores with different groups. We use that kind of test. And for a smaller test, like one independent variable, we use what we call a t-test. Again, this is assuming that this parametric data falls within that bell curve. There's no skewness, it's no outliers, things like that. We have also different types of evaluation. We have formative evaluation, which is where you have your needs assessment or your planning. You have your process evaluation, which is also known as implementation evaluation. This occurs during your program delivery. You're tracking your program fidelity, any modifications are happening, any deviations are happening. And this can help you identify any hiccups, staff turnover, financial constraints for that program, low attendance, that could be a huge bummer. And you can hopefully lead to any kind of mid-course corrections. You have your summative evaluation. This is where you compile everything at the very end, and then you analyze all your data and you get your results and you make a report. You have your outcome evaluation. And what you're doing here is that you're focusing on the changes in knowledge, skills, and behavior. what resulted exactly. And then you have the impact evaluation. It kind of answers that so what question, the impact. Now, what really happened? What was the real long-term impact? You have different kinds of methods used for primary, secondary data collection. Primary is when you collect the data yourself, like surveys or you do interviews or however you do it. Secondary data collection is when someone actually gives you that raw data and you analyze it yourself. You have quantitative, surveys again, those numerical data sets, but you need a code book to explain what those variables are. What does a 1 mean or what does a 2 mean when you see the data? And yeah, your data analysis for quantitative is for descriptors and making inferences, everything we've seen pretty much before. And for qualitative, think of like narrow but in depth. You're really doing a deep dive here. It could be observations, interviews, it could be semi-structured interviews or really structured interviews, depending what you want to do. But typically for program evaluators, we use semi-structured interviews. You have focus group discussions, ethnographies, which we don't use because they're very time consuming and costly. That's typically for research. And we also use document analysis and case studies. And yeah, qualitative data. It's we're trying to get an in-depth understanding of what people think on what their experience is, and that's why we do that. We do that because surveys can uncover that kind of information. We also use mixed methods where we integrate both, more time, more effort, obviously, but it adds rigor through data triangulation, and what that does to help validate your findings. And it often follows a sequence, but then you also have your multi-methods. You could also use different types of quantitative, qualitative methods, interviews, and then followed by focus groups, or 2 different surveys. So here's one example, or actually a couple examples of mixed method designs. You have your convergent, explanatory, and exploratory designs. These are common designs using mixed methods, I guess, by an evaluator. So convergent, use both quantitative, qualitative data collection methods. You collect your data, then you analyze it, and then you interpret it. Explanatory is where you give a survey out, you analyze the data when you have it. You can use that survey data or the results to create a interview process or I guess an observation protocol if you like. So give you more information about it, or you just follow it to confirm it, a different kind of protocol. And then you have explorative, which is the flipped. You want to interview people based on experiences with the whole snow that we had recently and it's cold weather. You analyze it and you say, you know what? I want to confirm whether or not people actually believe that they hate the snow right now because it's too much snow. So they send out a whole survey. And then you analyze and interpret it. We have data triangulation. So here's one example. So you have a person who goes to the emergency room with chest and shoulder pain, and he has some symptoms. Think like chest tightness, racing heartbeat, breathing issues. They start getting some numbness in their left arm and shoulder and hand, start to sweat, get some dizziness. And we need to know what the potential diagnosis is. It's probably not a good idea to ask like ChatGPT, AI or ChatGPT for an answer for this. So we need to collect data on this. And what the ER would typically do, they collect multiple data collection points on that person, usually over 2 hours or so. Qualitative data, what were you doing today? Were you exercising or something, or were you like running a marathon? How do you feel now? They'll take your blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, like I guess in baseline, that's dangerous. And then they'll measure over time. And let's say in this case it's dropping. They'll take your temperature, your resting heart rate. They do like an electrocardiogram. They want to see, your heart rhythm. You do a chest X-ray to look at your heart size. You have a large heart, or you have some broken ribs. You'll do a urine sample, see if someone actually took some drugs, unknowingly, I guess. You do a blood test, and it's a specific blood test called a troponin protein test. They'll look at your blood, see if there's a specific protein, see if your heart muscle is starting to die out. And they'll look at past medical history, look at a trend. And based on these different data collection points, they put it all together and say, okay, I think we know the diagnosis. Well, it's certainly not a heart attack. You probably had a panic attack in this case. This looks like an anxiety attack with someone. So the whole point is that they collect all this data on this one person, just to give them a better idea. So same thing for a program. We collect all this different data. So student test scores, student surveys, parent surveys, teacher surveys, all this different kind of data. And when you have it, you then clean it, analyze it, and then you get your results. And you compare and contrast those results. And then we have sampling and how we do this. And we're in the last stretch here in this case. You could collect a sample from parents, teachers, community members, whoever you want to study. You look at eligibility, whatever your inclusion, exclusion criteria. Consent forms is crucial in this case because you want to explain what you're doing and why, because if someone gives you a survey, what's for. And then if you want to up the response rate, yeah, incentives helps, gift cards or enter a raffle, you can, whichever way you want to do it. And then you break it down to your treatment group versus control group. Again, you can use match comparison demographics, probability, like a random assignment, your RCT, randomized control trials versus non-probability, which are more often used, non-randomized. Random selection versus random assignment. I put this one in here in case you want to see a difference, but in research, we use this. For an evaluator, you're probably more concerned about the random assignment. If you have a program that's really good and you want to scale it, then yeah, you probably want to use the random selection part in this case, where it's good for external validity, where you want to take your project or program that's really good and strong and apply it somewhere else to see if it works. Where you can go to a foundation and ask for a lot of funding. You have types of sampling. You have stratified sampling where you randomly select people into different groups. You have a big population you work with, so you separate them by gender, race, sports they play, whatever you want to do. You have convenience sampling. It's a non-probability sampling way of doing things. You just pick whatever's easy for you. If you're sitting at a local cafe, you can pick people there if you want to. It depends what you're searching for or what you're collecting data for. You have propulsive sampling. You specify the population characteristics and you locate people that match those characteristics. So like you you have a program that provides food at different food pantries. You go to a food pantry, you start interviewing people at a food pantry, or you give them surveys. It's propulsive, you have a purpose to this. Or you do snowball sampling, kind of like word of mouth advertising. If someone says, hey, I completed a survey, you get $5 if you do so. You tell your friends about it. Very similar to that. And this is an example of a work plan for a program evaluation. Very similar to the other one, but the health work plan. You have that. And then a quick recap. I know there's a lot of information. We went through like 50 something slides. I know it's a lot, but this gives you a linear process. Start from a needs assessment, theory change, you develop that program. You then deliver that program. You talk about how you're going to get process evaluation, how you're going then to analyze or measure it. You use your actual scientific methods, your data collection methods, surveying, interviews, whatever your design is. You then analyze that data using appropriate statistical methods, not just like, doing frequencies. And then those results should give you some kind of idea on mid-course corrections or modifications you need them. Review reports, and then you do your impact summit evaluations, where you can actually provide recommendations to inform proper decisions or evidence-based decisions. And here's some tools if you need some examples. And yeah, there you go. Quality self-assessment for any educators. This is very education-based, obviously. You have evaluability assessment. What this is for is to see, okay, yeah, do we actually have a program to really measure? If you use assessment and you don't score well in this, probably you don't have a program at all. You need to fix things up. And then we have a module element development. W.K. Kellogg Foundation, really good stuff on how to create a large model. And that's my info. You need to bug me. That's really it. How do we get out of this?
Anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, just so you know, chat.
Stop share. Yeah, no, a lot of info. Do apologize for that, but just want to give you as much as possible you can use, and it's very technical.
There is a question, I think, from Amy Tang. Her hands up.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really helpful. It's giving me grad school PTSD, but it's helpful. I guess stepping back from all of this, I wanted to know, like, how do you all figure out what your funders' expectations are for evaluation and what their preferences are? Because, like, for example, my background from grad school, like, I'm more of a qualitative researcher. So quantitative versus qualitative, and then if it's quantitative, like whether they really expect you to do an RCT or if it quasi-experimental is enough. Mainly, like, is this something that it's okay to ask them outright, or should you just try to infer it?
It's a great question.
Thanks.
So program evaluation is pragmatic by design. And when I say pragmatic, it has to be realistic. Now, the funder may put it like when you do write your grants, when you put a grant application together, you're gonna get that program evaluation section. You were like 10 points of the total scoring when in a rubric, or 20 points, and it could be a make or break on you. You know, you can say if you don't get those points, you can may not get that funding. So the funder will give you some kind of I guess steps or some parameter what they could be, but it also depends on multiple things. It depends on the amount of funding involved, what the program is, and how you're going to measure that program. And I'm going to really go into the funding one. So let's say you write a grant application for $1 million, and you have a required program evaluation in there. Let's say for I don't know 6 to 8% of the funding. And let's say, okay, you know what? I'm going to give $80,000 of that $1 million to an independent external evaluator. I mean, for any not-for-profit, $80,000 could be a good sizable amount of money. And then you have to kind of wonder, what do I get out of the $80,000? So if I'm the executive director or the CEO at that not-for-profit, what am I getting for those $80,000? And then the program evaluator, that train evaluator, needs to articulate that to that person, to that executive director. They as a consultant, they could say, all right, so for the $80,000, I can give you a good product here. I can give you that, in I guess using a metaphor here, I can give you that Toyota Camry that's fully loaded with hits all the bells and whistles. You're going to get a really good product here. Where if we have a $50,000 grant and your evaluation budget is only, I don't know, $5,000, you may get that Toyota Camry that's at the very base level with a stick transmission, like a manual transmission. With you got to roll the windows up and down, not automatic. So it all depends how you see this, So if you have a larger budget, you could do more, and the larger budget, you should expect more, because the stronger the evaluation is, the more likely you're going to see or really dissect that program in a good way. So if you want to use RCT, for example, that's a lot of work. You probably need a bigger budget for that because it requires more time and more. You got to really got to be nitpicky about things. If you want to use a quasi-experimental, which is more pragmatic, yeah, it probably wouldn't take so much effort, but it's still costly. So you have to see in that kind of way, like how much resources we have and what does the program really call for. If you have a lot of moving parts, if you have a big program, expect a more extensive evaluation in that case. I don't know if that makes any sense, but there you go.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then just for the other part of my question, is this something that it's okay to ask the funders contacts when you're trying to work on your proposal? Like, is it okay to ask them, what are your expectations for evaluation? Do you have examples of types of methods
You
that you like?
you could, but there sometimes the funder may not even know what to expect in terms of the evaluation because they defer to a trained program evaluator to really do a good job and provide a good product. And they use that, I guess they would use a good product as an exemplary model, as a way to doing that, because it's often the case that a foundation or a funder, they may not be trained in program evaluation. They're often trained like in business management or something, like an MBA, they may have that kind of background, and they may not be able to discern the difference between what a quality product looks like. So, but I say quality again, robustness, rigor. So, you could ask the foundation, but you may not get a really good answer. But if you go to, let's say, like at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or to a really large foundation that gives a lot of funding and really cares about their program evaluations, yeah, they may actually give you a really good answer. It all depends.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, listening to Amy, it's making me think that it might be, or would it be, the question is, would it be beneficial if you're going to use an evaluator to involve them when you're putting the program together and the proposal together, so that when you put your objectives, your outputs, your outcomes, all of those together, you know what you want to measure, you have an idea of how you're going to measure it so that you can deliver to the funder what you promised. Is that something you would
Yep.
recommend?
Agreed. Even referring to like that grant that I was talking about before. So here's one example. So the New York State Education Department right now has a grant opportunity called the Extended School Day School Violence Prevention Grant. Within that RFP, if you want to check it yourself, and Google if you like, in there, they want a program evaluator to do the evaluation section in that narrative. And that means that you have to Deborah's point in this case, you have to meet with the program evaluator, communicate with that program evaluator, provide your narrative, your intervention, a program intervention that you want to do, so they can actually create an evaluation plan that covers or could assess your said intervention or your program. So you have this aligned communication. So you're not really making up the evaluation. Because if you have someone who's not trained in program evaluation, and often the case, and I mean this with all due respect, they may put together a quick survey, get the results, and put together a few bar charts and say, okay, here's my evaluation. That's not the case. It's much more complex than that. It's systematic, it's technical, and there's a scientific process to this that follows a code of ethics. And you can't just go like, put this in AI and figure it out. You have to be trained in how to do this. And it's very important that, you work with someone. If you know how to do this, you work with someone who does. So you work with a trained evaluator who can walk you through this process. And that's key to doing that. And if any not-for-profits that has someone who can do this kind of work, I guess, let's say for myself, you can help build that kind of capacity within the organization so they can look at data and use data to make really smart, informed decisions. I think I see Michelle's hand. So, Michelle.
So just a quick question. If you did get that grant, Jeff, and I hope you do, and it is evaluated throughout, the whole contract, and you go on to apply for a new grant where they don't require that, could you use the fact that you've already been evaluated, you've already made some best practice changes based on that evaluation, et cetera? Could you use that going forward, or would you just reevaluate every time you go for a new contract? I'm just wondering.
I would definitely use those results to really market, advertise the program that you have at hand, especially if you have some good statistically significant results showing that you have good efficacy in your program. And what foundation would not want to eat that up? It's like, hey, I got $500,000, it's like, hey, can I apply for this funding? I have this really good program and it's been validated. I want to scale this out. And that's how it all starts. So again, you need the skill set to really show if you have good results or not.
So you could just go on using those results for all of your future funding asks. Okay.
I mean,
Great.
think about it. If you're a foundation, you're going to probably run a risk assessment on all the people who are applying for funding. Are you like a new organization, or is this your first grant, or do you have a history of applying for grants? What grants have you won before in the past? Tell me about your capacity and pre-qualifications here. And if you do really want to, per se, risk assessment, that gives some reassurance for that foundation to invest money into that organization to apply that intervention to help whatever target population you're doing. And then the evaluation should really put them at ease. Helene, yeah.
No, just to emphasize what you said, I think it's a good idea. Even if there is no evaluation requested in the RFP, I think when you're applying, even though there may be a cost to it, I would recommend including that, even if it's a small evaluation, because number one, it only makes you look better, and number two, the funder is going to realize after the fact, oh, we want to know what the impact is. Can you do an evaluation? So you're better off if you've incorporated that from the very beginning. Than waiting for them to realize that they actually need it. So it can only benefit you in the long run.
I have to apologize. And we went over time. I'm sorry for that. It's like 107, 108. We're over time, but thanks for staying.
Absolutely. And people will get the recording. The questions are good. I have one more question. So for small organizations that don't have much of a budget, have not built in data collection or evaluation, do you have any suggestions?
If you're applying for a grant, if it's a small grant, build it into your work plan, to the program work plan. So like if you're going to implement X, Y, Z activities, at the same time, put how you're going to do your process evaluation in there. Like if you're going to provide a baseline survey or pre-survey, and then once those activities are done, let's say a month or two later, then or whatever that time is, then do a post-survey. You want to measure any kind of change whatsoever. So you have to build some kind of a system. It's always good to have some kind of system here. So you're assessing to what you're doing as well. It's like imagine like you're going to the doctor, you say I have all these symptoms, and the doctor says, you know what? I don't need to run any tests on you. Here, take this medication and you'll go away. That doesn't make any sense. They got to run some tests. Like, don't you want to take my blood pressure, or do you want to, do an MRI? Those tests are there for a reason. That's why they do evaluation on you in that case, but more like in a health based. So the best way is you build it in. And if you don't know how to create a survey or you don't know how to do interviews, maybe get trained up how to do that. That's important to know how to do. You can also search for validated surveys online, like validated instruments. Like if you do working with food insecurity, look for like a hunger survey. Or if you're working with after school students in a program and you're focused on mental health, maybe focus on a survey that looks at social emotional learning about if they understand about depression or mental health and mental health concepts, things like that, or how they're feeling. So and you can use that over time to kind of give you an idea, like is there any change happening here? And if you're not getting any change, you may want to alter the instruments you're using or modify the activities that you're doing.
Any suggestions for where to get training like that?
Ooh, the AEA has some, the American Evaluation Association. Locally, I haven't seen any here. I don't think there's any like consultant evaluators that does this kind of training because I'm not sure. That's a great question. Typically, you see this kind of training like within a large program and stuff like, and I'll give you one example, like New York State Education Department. They implemented their 21st Century Community Learning Centers program, which is a large federal education program. And within that program requires an evaluation component. And within that program, you have a network of different evaluators, most consultants, but they're trained evaluators. And they'll go and, they have like this big community practice. And what they do is that they help each other out and they do trainings around the state. I haven't seen it here locally, but maybe that's a need that we have here. It's possible.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I will just say that I've taken some trainings through our wonderful sponsor, nonprofit Westchester, where they've offered outcomes, so training in creating measurable outcomes. But after this presentation today, Jeffrey, it's really clear to me that there's so much more to it. And that's kind of like the light version, sort of if you can't,
Yes.
like if you can't afford the data collection and the evaluation. So I think you've kind of put your finger on a real need, in the community. So, and because one of the things that's interesting to me that you just said is and that Helene said is the competitive advantage, and that Michelle said, sorry, all of you, it gives you a competitive advantage. Clearly, if you're able to say to funders who are wondering about impact, which is mostly what they wonder about because they want to know that they're making a difference. That's why they're doing this. And in a very competitive field, it will give you an edge to say, hey, we've built in data collection and evaluation.
I mean, I guess the common denominator in many cases with the evaluation is that you want to look for quality. When you have a high quality product, you're going to have more opportunities in that case for funding. And when I say by quality, is it transformational or does it have a good fit to the program that you're doing? And could you scale it to somewhere else? So you're looking for high quality stuff. And to get that quality, again, dosage, the breadth of it, the duration, that's important. So, one-offs they don't work. Like for example, like I'm gonna use the after school program, for example. They set a parameter that a regular attending student in an after school program, it receives 15 or more hours of programming. I mean, if someone really wanted to use that policy and take advantage of it, they could just fill up a bunch of kids in school buses, go down to a museum for like 2 days and do their 15 hours, and they're done. But don't expect good outcomes with that, even though they did it. It's compliance. But if you do like 300 hours across the entire school year, yeah, expect some really good change, some change that we really do need. So you have to see it that way. Quality matters. Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks to Jeff for sharing your time and your expertise today. And as a reminder, we'll be in touch to share the program recording and materials. And I ask that you take 1 minute, or it's already been asked, to complete the brief post-program survey. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job, Jeff. Thank you.
Stop.